Hi church, and welcome back to Unmasked for Episode 2. We're really delighted this week to have Elim's Director of Ministry, Pastor Stuart Blount. So many of you will know who were at my induction. Stuart was my senior pastor for about 24 years, I think Stuart he was. Yeah. And he's actually more like an uncle to me as well as a pastor. So I'm just really delighted we can have Stuart on. And the aim of this session is really to just talk to Stuart, find out a little bit of his backstory. I'm sure there's so much we can glean from and learn from him. So get your notepads out as we talk through this episode of Unmasked. So Stuart, should we just start right back at the very beginning before we get into the Elim stuff and your current role as Director of Ministry? Tell us a little bit about yourself, how old you were when you became a Christian, maybe your home church, a little bit about what that looked like and when you came to faith.
Yeah, so I was born into a Christian home, second of 4 boys, and very much an Elim family. Going back on my paternal side, my nan was an early convert and was at some of the early crusade meetings, and on my maternal side as well, right back to my grandparents and just before on that side. So I kind of grew up in Elim Church in Tamworth in South Staffordshire, just north of Birmingham. And so I kind of grew up in that environment, late 60s, early 70s as a child, where church was quite traditional, even for a Pentecostal, and very, very rigid in how we did church 3 times on a Sunday, morning, Sunday school in the afternoon, evening service. Strong Christian family, particularly on my mum's side, uncles and aunts, very much involved in church, involved in our family. And so, Sunday school and all of that, it had its challenges for me. We may talk a little bit about that when I go into my teenage years, particularly, but certainly my kids' years, church was a great environment for me. And I came to faith, actually, when I was 9 and a half years old, at a baptismal service where my brother and a number of my cousins were being baptised. Actually, John Glass, our former General Superintendent, was the preacher that day in 1975, 24th of May 1975. And I think, for me, it was almost a very natural progression of growing up in a Christian environment, understanding, having a great Sunday school environment, and quite unremarkable in many ways. I think we'll chat in a moment or two about something quite remarkable in my teens, but it just felt like a very normal, natural thing to respond in realising that my parents' faith and my family faith wasn't going to get me anywhere. So it's like any childhood. You don't really reflect on it much until you're a bit older, and you might look and sometimes contrast and compare other people's lives and upbringing. It was normal and natural for me in many ways.
Yeah, so you mentioned, obviously, coming to faith at 9.5 years old, 1975, 24th of May. But you also alluded that your teenage years were a little bit difficult as well. So I think particularly when you brought up in a church, your family, there's almost like that cultural Christianity sort of, the term I guess I'd use is you piggyback on the faith of mum and dad, or nan and granddad, uncles and aunts, etc., etc. So what was those tumultuous years, your teenage years, what was the things that happened there that you sort of alluded to?
I think for me, it was the challenge of going into senior school. I went into a comprehensive school, and there was such a contrast. You grow up very fast, don't you, in that environment, and your independence comes in, but you're so aware then that I certainly was, for me, probably it's less so now, but we were so different to the other kids in school. So I was a big sportsman, huge football fan, cricket, played a lot of sport. I was relatively good at sport, played for the school football team and that, but I wasn't allowed to play football on a Sunday. It wasn't just that it was impractical for my generation, it was ungodly and unrighteous. Yeah. Wasn't allowed to go to the pictures. You've heard me tell the story. I first went to the pictures. I was 16. It was to see Snow White and the 7 Dwarfs, and you can hardly boast to your mates about that, can you? And the whole story behind that with one of my aunts who kind of pushed the boundaries for us all, thankfully, my auntie Alison. So it was sheltered, and the sheltered nature of my upbringing, the restrictiveness of it, just became so apparent that even as a 12, 13, 14-year-old, I felt I had 2 lifestyles. I was trying to fit in with the kids at school, maybe using terminology I shouldn't, and trying to be something and exaggerating something of what I was trying to be. But then when I was in youth club or in church, very much trying to fit into that. And neither really felt a fit. And pretty much from the age of 11, 12 through till 16, it was that battle back and forth. Even in a church that was changing, developing, had a good amount of young people around me, I just felt a fish out of water in school. But because of the way I was living in school to try to fit in, a fish out of water in the church as well, in that environment.
Wow, yeah. I think so many people will be able to relate to that as well, being brought up. I think I can relate to that. I think it would have been twice as difficult in the sort of decade you were brought up in than I was brought in, because the contrasts were so starkly different, where they would have, I guess, relaxed a bit to the 90s and 2000s. So you're saying that sort of stopped at 16. Did something happen there, or was that just how you equate your teenage years? Was there a defining moment or something?
There was, and it was almost like a defining moment of a very significant negative type, and then leading into a defining moment of incredibly positive. So really around my 16th birthday, made a big mistake in a relationship that could have absolutely blown my life out the water for where I was then. But actually, it's about people who made an impact on your life, and somebody who got a hold of me then, and that was my pastor then in the town with Elim Church, Barry Killett, for whom I'll thank God for the rest of my life, really, because he just, as a pastor, young himself in his mid-30s, got a hold of me, but I think he saw something in me. And I think it was a jolt for me because, I needed somebody. I wasn't particularly fathered spiritually well at home in that sense, but certainly in terms of having a pastor like that who didn't allow my errors and mistakes to define me, which, became a big part of my journey as a leader, I think, with people, because that was a massive experience for me, which led on in heading towards my 17th birthday of just finding this fresh passion for God. My aunt and uncle took me away with them and my cousin to Dale's Bible Week in the early 1980s. And I just had the most amazing, powerful encounter with the Holy Spirit. So got saved in 1975. I got baptized in 1978. I got filled with the Spirit later in 1978, spoke in tongues. And my auntie Helena was there. She was a former member of Luton Christian Fellowship, now in Dunstable, and prayed for us, filled with Spirit, spoke in tongues. But at the same time, I never really encountered the Spirit as someone that I could know personally. And at this Dale's Bible Week, just an amazing encounter with what I believe was the glory of God in a worship moment that just blew my mind apart. And that became the catalyst, I think, for starting to feel there's something about my life. I'd left school in 1982. It was a difficult time in our country. There were strikes happening all across the country. There were 3 million people unemployed. And for my generation, leaving with O-levels or CSEs in our day and not A-levels, they went to university. But guys like me, we just had to go and get a job. At that stage, YTS schemes, youth training schemes offering £25 a week for, hard labour in a factory with guys telling you to go and get a long wait from the stores, and then you're standing an hour later not realising you've been had, But actually, I just was trying to find a sense of purpose in my life. And I went with a couple of young people from my church to an Operation Mobilisation weekend here in Birmingham, where I live, in Digbeth Hall. And when I drive past there on occasions now, just so moved by it, and heard George Verwer passionately talk about the gospel to the nations, and it stirred me, and all the passion in me stirred. And I remember going back to my home church when there was a testimony opportunity in the evening, and I just kind of effectively got up and told everybody they should sell their houses, give up their jobs, and go and become missionaries. And my pastor, again, Barry at the time, he just had a way of handling me, understanding the passions of my life. And I remember to this day what he said. He got up after I'd spoken and said, "Folks, I'd rather channel enthusiasm than try and raise the dead." And I think that's what he started to do with me. And I believed I was called to missions. I was going to go to Southern Ireland for a year. I don't know why Southern Ireland. I think maybe it was overseas, but not too far overseas. Yeah. But I started to have doubts. Was this right? I'd be away from home. I'd never been away from home. And he said to me, "I think you need some training." I just turned 18, sorry. "I think you need some training." Encouraged me to consider heading off to Elim Bible College. And I still didn't understand the call of God at that stage, though I now know that that had been unlocked in my life. I just couldn't quantify it or qualify it, I should say. And that, again, just great advice from somebody who believed in me, who saw I had lots of rough edges. And that's what I did in 1984. I kind of applied to go to Elim Bible College very late in the process in the summer, went down for an interview, and end of September 1984, I was packing my bags and heading to Capel, where our Bible college was then. And I think it was just that first 6 months were pivotal in my life, because again, people who were influenced on me, people like Keith Warrington and Jim Hunt, who was my Dean of Students, and who started just to say things to me that made me believe, actually, maybe there's a call on my life. And as much as I probably went there very reluctant with the notion of being a pastor, because I'd seen and heard enough in my church about how some pastors were treated.
Yeah.
But it just came alive in me, and I found what I was about. I found what I'd been born for, and I absolutely believe it. I know a life verse for me became Jeremiah 1:5, before I knew you, I set you apart as a prophet to the nations. And I think I suddenly realised I wasn't born for all the struggles of my childhood or youth or the mistakes, but that was all part of forming what I was called. And I've never doubted from that day to this, I was called to serve God in his kingdom.
That's amazing. So a real turnaround in those 2 years, from 16 to sort of 18. So looking back now as a seasoned leader, you've pastored churches.
The grey hairs.
The grey hairs. Sign of wisdom, the Bible tells us. What would you say to your 16-year-old self, if you could, anything? Bearing in mind that some 16-year-olds may be watching in a similar position.
Yeah. I'd actually say, you do not know yet what God can do with your life if you just give him, more of who you are. I think I was somebody who covered my insecurities and my huge sense of inadequacies with humour and having a laugh and doing anything to get people to laugh at me. I was a clown in school, but I didn't believe that I could amount to anything. I think I would want to take him by the shoulders and lovingly shake him and say, you can do anything. And I've got to say, I think that's been reflected in how I've tried to parent my kids, that they will say, I've told them all their lives, you can do anything if God's on your side. If you trust in God, you can become anything. It's not just the kind of American dream hype. I genuinely believe eye has not seen, ear has not heard, neither does it enter the heart, man, the things that God has prepared for those that love him. And one of my life verses, Ephesians 3:20, to him who's able to do immeasurably more than all we can ask or imagine. And I think I would say to myself, don't believe in yourself, believe in what God can do through you.
And I think that's not just testament to sort of Matt, Gaz and Lydia as your children, but also, and we'll talk about this in a little while, but how you pastored your churches, and particularly with young men and women who felt that call of God on their life. You've really harnessed and shaped and come alongside that. I think what I've sort of experienced firsthand is you're not someone who just sends people to Bible college to be trained or on mission or whatever it is. You walk that process with them. You don't just release them. You release them and then walk alongside them, which I think is just phenomenal. You used a phrase once, I steal it because I use it all the time. You believe in unusual opportunity because that was afforded to you. Yeah. And I think there's a book in that unusual opportunity, because so many people are a product of unusual opportunity. There's so many people who've got the giftings and the talents and the God-given purpose, I believe, that just aren't released. And because they're not released, end up getting hurt or burnt and never realise that full potential. You talk about the Ephesians 3:20 thing. So, firstly, thank you on my behalf. Also, thank you for all the people you've done that to.
Yeah. I mean, that 16, 17-year-old who made those mistakes, that pastor put me on the platform to lead worship. And at 17, put me in charge of a small group. He was starting a small group program. And I said, why you put me in charge of a small group? And it was primarily because my Bible knowledge was better than others. And that was all down to the Sunday school leaders and youth leaders I had who, trained us, taught us to memorize scripture. That's something from my generation. I'm so grateful to God, that we did in Sunday school and in our youth group. And my Sunday school superintendent, Barry, and his wife, Lindsay, used to coach us for Bible quizzes we were in. And I was given, that's a phrase from Malcolm Gladwell's book Outliers, extraordinary opportunity.
Yeah.
You know, and you can have ability and you can have drive and passion, but if nobody gives you opportunity, you never get a chance to grow it. So I was given that. So maybe we all are, the things we do well are a product of how we were led well.
Yeah, that's brilliant. It's really good. So obviously you've gone to Bible college. I don't know if there's anything you want to touch on particularly there, if you feel there's any lessons you learned there that were valuable, not only, I guess, to where you are now, but also valuable for us. Is there anything in those 3 years that shaped you or formed you that you really sort of
it was
made you believe who you are?
An amazing period in my life. I mean, I just would not change it for the world. I mean, I made lifelong friendships, people who aren't necessarily in the Elim ministry. I mean, you know, one of my closest friends, Steve, is how I met Amanda, through Steve. And we've had a great life together and serving God together. Folks who are in ministry, I just learned a desire to explore God and His Word. I developed a confidence in that, in learning. But, you know, I got such good role models. Jim Hunt, I've mentioned Eldin Corsi, who was our principal. I just was so in awe of him, still am. He was such a great leader, such a great person. So many things I could say that, and you know, you talked about how I and the churches, particularly CLC, supported our guys and girls who went to Bible college, partly because I just knew that how life-changing it can be for somebody. So for me, it was just, I grew up I was mixed in a group of people. I was second youngest in my year. And there was a lot of older people. I matured and I was away from home and I became more independent, and I had friends who matured me, and some of the difficult times matured me. Some of the moments on the football pitch matured me, and all that kind of thing. But I look back and you know, my wife would tell you, Amanda, when I get together with an old college buddy, we just tell the same old stories time after time after time after time and laugh at them. And it was a great season for me.
So what would you say to the person who's maybe watching, is considering Bible college or thinking about it? Is it something they should pursue? Is it something they should explore? What would be, I guess, if someone's thinking about it, what would be your advice in a sentence or two?
I absolutely would, because I do believe that we need preparation for ministry. Yeah. I think that there's a lot of people, and one of the problems in the church is people think because I've led a small group, I can lead. I think there's so much in not just theological training and not just ministry training, but in character training about being with other people. And obviously our own college offers a number of different avenues. You can still engage with some of that on campus whilst being in your church, and I believe in that too. I think that's a really good model for where we are as the church today. But I do think that training and equipping and learning, you know, I've always been inspired by how the Apostle Paul, you know, after his amazing experience in Damascus and then the church in Jerusalem, a bit panicky when he's brought to them there, and they send him off to Tarsus, and we don't hear from him for 9 years. 9 years. Until Barnabas brings him down to Antioch to do some teaching. We don't know what happened in that 9 years, apart from he just learned and he grew and took his Pharisaical learning with his encounter with the Spirit and became this leader that turns up in Antioch in Acts 11. And then before we know it, he's been sent off on 3 missionary journeys that took the gospel. Preparation's critical. And often, and I find it in my role, people are in a hurry, but I don't think God is.
That's so poignant. Isn't it easy, I think, when you pick up Acts and you see the Damascus Road experience, which is like Acts 9, I think, and Paul has this amazing experience, and then you turn over the page and he's preaching, and you miss there's a 9-year gap literally between chapters. And as you said, he was a Pharisee, so he would have known the sort of the Old Testament, the scripture of the day, inside out, and still there's 9 years of preparation. And God's not in a hurry. I like that. That's brilliant. So let's talk really about I guess your bread and butter for most of your working life as a pastor. And we know that's much more than a job, particularly for many of our guys serving. It's not just a paycheck, is it? It's a calling, and it's something that I think really grabs hold of your heart and sort of God gets hold of you about. So talk us a little bit about, I guess, let's start with the churches that you started ministering out in. I know you started as an assistant and moved through, and then an amazing tenure at CLC, which I guess we'll spend most of our time talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I've been absolutely blessed to serve where I have served. Every one of the 3 settings I've served as a pastor, just so blessed. In my time in Bible college, I got to be part of a team that went to Swansea to do what was a 10 mission that the college often sent students out on. I met Dennis Phillips, who was the pastor of the Swansea church, and he took a keen interest in me. I talked about Barry Killick. The next big person in my life was Dennis Phillips, and again, he saw something in me. And long story short, I got the chance at the end of my 3 years to go to Swansea as assistant, which was wonderful because I'd met this beautiful Welsh girl called Amanda, who was from Llanelli, which was 15 miles away. So kind of felt that God was in that. And I was served alongside Dennis only for 10 months, really, because he then left to become the first full-time regional leader that we had for Elim in the Midlands and the Southwest, and then Warren Williams came as a senior minister there. But I loved my time in Swansea. The people were amazing. They were encouraging, supportive. You know, I had great opportunities to learn, to preach, to lead worship, to pastor. I was sent out to visit people, and I had no car or go on a bus. And yet in those bus journeys, as frustrating as it was not having a car, I learned to kind of just try to encounter God in those times. Andrew and I got married there, but then just since one day God was stirring something in me. One of the lessons I've learned is that God will often stir something in you before he stirs something outside of you. And over a period of a month or so, God really spoke to me and then to Amanda. And long story short, in early 1990, we moved to High Wycombe, not too far from where you are. We were there for 4 years. I was 24 years old, first church I'd led on my own, a small church. It never particularly grew my time there, but I grew. We had some wonderful people there around us, loving people. They took us in. They not only understood my youth, but I think they made room for it. Remember an old farmer called John Smith and his wife Ruth, who were lovely, and Ray and Merle, who were he was our elder, and so supportive and encouraging. Actually used to come over to Luton when Des was a guy called Des was youth leader, and do some stuff with the young people. We had our
Des Taylor.
Yeah, I was regional youth leader for a while, and we did some events in Luton. But that was just a great season. It was frustrating, and I found it difficult because I was full of energy and vision and passion, and wanted the church to grow. But there were moments in my desperation. I would, after the church prayer meeting where we'd had 6 people in a semicircle in a little lounge, I'd stay on kind of crying, God, I want more than this. But in that crying for more on my own in the church for an hour after, just learning, to try to meet with God, really. And there's so many moments I could talk about God spoke to me there. And I often say, the people were wonderful, but the ministry opportunities were like a wilderness. I had 4 years, Moses had 40, so I didn't do too bad, really, I suppose. But I grew exponentially, but I didn't realise I had. It wasn't till in 1994 when we eventually moved to CLC and Birmingham Christian Life Centre. In my journey there, I began to understand everything I'd learned in High Wycombe. And so, we moved to CLC in 1994. It was a church that had its difficulties. Another big influence in my life played a big part in that, Win Lewis. He took me to one side one day in a regional meeting. I'd kind of let the executive council of the day know I think I was ready to move. And he said, I'm sending you to Birmingham, to CLC. It's got its problems, but you can sort it out. And nobody was more amazing in Elim of raising young leaders than Win Lewis. So many of my generation look to Win, who we sadly lost some number of years ago, 10, 11 years ago now, as somebody who influenced us so greatly. But went to a church, a lot of the story of the church. It had a history. It had originated as a split from the Elim church down the road and been many years as an independent church before it had come back into Elim via our ECI network. And I went there 28 years old with Amanda, and Matthew was 2.5 in tow. And as you say, I think that is the place. We were there for 23 years pretty much. That is the place where much of what I've become and learned and grown into, it was my school schooling and my education as a leader in many ways.
Yeah, and I think you walked into, I would have been probably 4 years old. Matthew was 2.5, I would have been 4, maybe 5. And I remember meeting at our building, the George Cadbury Hall. And as I look back now, and just the snippets I can remember from the really, really early days, just it being quite stoic and Pentecostal. And I guess just seeing in your tenure and growing up around you, just seeing how you not only change the culture, but shape the culture. So you'd never think of CLC without Stuart Blount for a long time, I guess, through that tenure, because so much of who you are was who CLC were. So talk about a few defining moments, I guess, for you at CLC. So some of the lessons you learned, some of the big highlights for you, which I'm sure you could write numerous books about. But maybe if you had to pick a few.
Yeah, I think I had to learn quickly. Again, I was 28. There were some strong personalities in the church, some of them in the eldership. There was a history of eldership meetings often being conflicted, and even members who served alongside each other, battling a little bit with each other. So I think early on, I had to just learn what it was to lead strong people. And that wasn't about shouting louder. I think one of my values became the greatest leaders, not those who shout the loudest, but those who think the clearest. And I think I had to learn quick and young that I had to be clear, I had to be sharp. If I wanted to bring something to develop the church, then I had to be able to articulate that well to the leaders. I had to allow them time to process. So I had to be a bit more patient than I felt I wanted to be. But I think I went there. I remember saying to God, I just wanted to find somewhere where I could realise my dreams. And I never wanted to be a pastor that, as I'd known as a child, that moved every 2 or 3 years. I wanted stability for me, for my family. I think I understood enough to know that good things take time to build. Yeah. Even though I was battling often with my natural impatience as a person. But I think the other thing was, early on, I made it very clear to the leaders, I was not a good one-man band. I worked best in a team. And I wanted a commitment from them to be able to build a team. And they were ready for that. They heartily gave me that support. There was no reluctance in them. And as you know, in October 1995, Simon Foster joined me. He was from the church originally, gone to Bible college, supported by the church. They were doing that before I ever came. That was part of the culture of the church, to support people who went off in ministry. So I was able to build with that. He came back after a little period serving in another Elim church. We were and we are so different, but we work so well together because of that. And we brought different things. We moved the church forward. But I think the other thing was churches have to take big steps of faith if they really want to break through. And as you know, the story was that we saw the opportunity to take the church out of a rented facility, buy a piece of land off the council, build a new building. It was a 4 or 5 year journey in which we saw financial miracles. I think that the biggest miracles I ever saw at CLC were not healing, they were financial miracles. Yes. Amazing breakthroughs. 150 people raised £120,000 in 2.5 months for the bank to agree to lend us £500,000. And then when we did complete the building, we paid £500,000 off in 6.5 years. And so that was, we had a successful business of an old people's home running as well. I think that the steps of faith we took, and I realised the things I learned was I had to stretch myself every year to stretch the church, which was not too much a challenge, because I think I always had that energy and enthusiasm every year. Where do we go now? Never settle. Yeah. I remember someone preaching an amazing message called Are You Pioneers or Settlers? And it set the scene, I think, for our church, that we were going to be pioneers and breakthrough. And yeah, we were changing the culture. That wasn't easy. That came with conflict along the way in parts. But I think that as we saw people getting saved and as we saw the church growing because people coming to faith, it almost justified the efforts we were making to change the way we did things. I've always strongly believed that what we believe is unchanging, but our methods have to be adaptable and flexible. and keep learning. I kept learning. I came across Hillsong, came across Brian Houston in October 95 at a conference. A friend at the time, Ray Bevan, had a conference, and he said to me, "You've got to come down and hear this guy." And I did. Started to see just something in the worship life initially of that church. But we started to begin to try to transition the church in those ways again. Wasn't without its challenges. But the leadership and the culture of Hillsong really spoke to me. I was, soaking up Brian's teaching. That was a big influence on me, really. So those steps of faith, the building was a massive push forward because we were already a decent church. We'd started to shape some stuff in the 4 or 5 years since I got there, and Simon coming along and maybe ironing out some of the conflicts that had happened in the church and just moving forward with that. But then all of a sudden we took a good church from a building it rented, nobody knew, onto this brand new building on the A38 Bristol Road, one of the 4 main arterial routes in and out of Birmingham, north, south, east and west. And we rocketed. And I remember John Glass was our guest speaker at our opening service, and we went out for lunch after, and I was in John's car with him, and he just turned to me halfway to the restaurant and said, "Stuart, you've got a plan for multiple services." And I remember saying, "John, we've only just got in the building," He was absolutely right. By the next September, by the March, actually, Simon was already talking with me about that. We were talking with the elders, and this next September, we went into a second morning service. And each time it was and then within a year we said, well, if we do kids ministry in that service, we'll grow. And we were just, I think, always looking. And I think at times, the other thing I learned was that teams do change. Sometimes there were seasons, as difficult as it was, we had to change some of the way the team was, the personnel of the team, to move something fresh forward. Okay, that's worked well for this season, that person leading that, but we need somebody here to do that and to bring leadership to that. But I think probably another critical thing for me, which will feed into what I think you probably want to ask me next, is the decision we took that we wanted to go to build a church that would be multi-generational, that would impact young people. Many of us as elders had kids get into our teenage years, and their teenage years, it's like, is our church going to be attractive for them? And the step of faith was, we're going to employ a full-time youth pastor. I mean, Lewis taught us years ago, staff for where you want to grow. I always remember that. And the elders, I've got to say, they were amazing to me. If we presented a faith challenge, 9 times out of 10, they'd say, let's go with it. And of course, the more we did that, where we saw some of those successes, I suppose they felt they could trust me a little bit more. They would still want to question that. They still maybe want to test it a little bit, quite rightly. That's the way it should be. But when we employed a full-time youth pastor, we started to really invest finances, personnel into young people. Your generation was the first people that got some of that when Becky came along. Not your Becky, another Becky. We really started, and we hit some. We have youth ministry is a little like this. It's a generational thing. You kind of get some that come in at 13, 14, and then when they get to 18, 19. It drops a bit and you have to rebuild again. It's a little bit like that. But and I think but we were blessed because so many of the older folk in the church got excited when the young people were involved. And we developed youth bands because we believed in involving them, using them. It wasn't just me, it was others as well who believed in that. The elders backed that. And giving extraordinary opportunities.
I remember it well. Yeah, I remember being. I'm sorry, I'm not crying up. It's just my hay fever.
If you're moved by it, Mike, I'm really pleased with that.
Yeah, I remember being one of maybe 4 young people. So there was myself, and then your Matthew, my brother, and then 1 or 2 others, and we used to meet in the back room. And then I remember Becky coming and starting this Ignite service, and it just rocketed, didn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, the youth ministry really took off.
I think one of the things we did was, we had 3 services on a Sunday, and we were still getting quite a large crowd of people to our Sunday evening services, even though by that stage the morning was growing bigger than the evening, which hadn't been the case before we moved into the new building.
Yeah.
And Becky really wanted to do something very much for young people, and we said, we've got to back this. And so the first Sunday night of the month, that Ignite service, we said we're giving over
Ignite Live. Yeah.
And we did have challenges because but that was part of how you can build culture, because in that moment of tension, friction, as I would call it, sometimes it's the moment to say to folks, hey, if we don't invest in this generation, there's nothing to follow us. We need leaders coming through. We need worship teams coming through. We need evangelists coming through. But thankfully, I always had the support of the elders. And so that for a season, really after Becky, Tony Irving came along, and it rocketed on under Tony. And I think it was just, again, mate, you don't build culture with words, you build culture with actions, really. And I think that it was saying, no, this is what we're committed to. This is what we're committed to. Eventually, it became part of the fabric and the culture of the church. And you remember Irene was one of our older ladies. She played the piano for years. And she came to one day, she said, I'm never as happy as when I'm seeing, it was you, it was my Matthew, it was Christian, it was others who were playing instruments. She said, it's time for me to step back because I just enjoy watching them. And I was so moved. Yeah. But she was sincere in it. She wasn't just someone saying, I'd been pushed off the piano. And I just think that churches still today that focus significantly on raising up the next and the younger generations will always prosper. I believe it strongly.
Yeah, and I think as I already said it, that's not just paying your lip service. You backed it up with action, and you didn't just empower great youth pastors like Becky, like Tony. I mean, saw amazing growth under Tony again, didn't we? Saw 150 young people a week, phenomenal with Tony and Carla. But you didn't just sort of hand it off to Tony and Carla as well. You were still fully involved, and you turn up at the youth services. A lot of senior pastors, I don't think, do that. They sort of leave the young people, leave the youth team get on with it, and there's a disconnect. And it can almost, I guess, feel like two separate entities. Although it's one church, you've got three different departments, but they all feel like their own thing. I think you just did an amazing job of keeping that unity together. So you just speak maybe quickly into the importance for you of that multi-generational church, but also the senior leaders' role in that, the eldership's role in that, the older people's role in that as well.
Well, at the end of the day, the church will be passionate about what the senior leaders are passionate about. And there will always be some people that aren't, but there's no chance of anybody being passionate about anything that the senior leader is not passionate about. Yeah. And ultimately, as a senior leader, what you want more than anything are leaders around you, your elders, your teams, who see the passions and get on board and help you see those happen. And for me, partly as a father, my dream in life has always been that my kids are with me in heaven. That's my number one dream in life. Yeah. That's what drives me. That drives my prayer life. My primary focus in life before ministry is that my kids are with me in heaven. So why not everybody else's kids as well? Yeah. And I suppose for me, I was just passionate. I got such a thrill. So I could go to those Sunday meetings when it was the youth, before we were doing something else to help for others to gather, and just stand at the back. And it was just the most exciting time for me. It was raw, it was different, it was reckless, it was messy, but it was amazing because I would stand on the platform and say, if we don't provide an environment for young people to get excited, there's plenty of people out there who are going to give it them.
Yeah, it's true.
And then I remember one of our guys complaining about actually about Jack playing his guitar in church quite loud and raucous, and I went to visit him because he'd put this on Facebook. So it wasn't long before I left, actually. And I remember saying to him, you know what, if you decide not to come to the church again, we're going to see each other in heaven. But if those 16 and 17 and 18-year-olds decide not to come again, I'm not sure we will. They're not the minority. And so often, churches are built for the comfort and the convenience of the middle-aged and not to dramatically affect younger people. And I had people at CLC who would have given anything for that young man, that young woman on the stage to be their granddaughter, their nephew, their niece, who they were praying for. And so, it was a passion, but also I felt and still feel today, it's my legacy. My legacy isn't the building. Yeah. And my legacy isn't my sermons on CD or even tape because I'm that old. My legacy, what I hope that when I do retire, is that I'll be able to look around Elim and other streams and see men and women who are just serving God and extending that, as I am a part of the legacy of those who led me, of the Barrys and the Dennises and the Win Lewises and John Glass, who encouraged me so significantly in those years. Hopefully I'm a reflection of all that they are. And that's what it means to be in the ministry. That's what the Apostle Paul was doing with Timothy. Timothy, take these things and entrust them to other people. That is the Christian ministry. To take everything that we capture of God and give it away and pass it on. And I'm just thrilled to still see, even not in Elim ministry, some of the guys just from the years before I left CLC serving in Elim churches now. I think of Alex and Joe in Cardiff and Coventry, people that you would know. And to me, that's my legacy, really. And that's what, when we'll get on to it, is what drives me in my current role.
Yeah, it's a perfect segue, really, from CLC into your current role. As you said, I think, me knowing you personally, and as you're saying that, I can see the faces, not just through Elim, and there's many faces just in Elim, but also outside of Elim in different Christian streams, but also in the marketplace. So often look at raising people up in church, it's like the epitome is to get in Christian ministry, and that's not the case, is it? People are faithfully serving Jesus, they've grown up in the church, through the church, they're teenagers, they're 20s, and they're still serving Jesus today. I mean, that's a massive accomplishment, and something you see, you're looking around, all the faces that I see on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, the guys I grew up with, some who are older, some who are younger than me. And that really, it's an amazing legacy that I'm a product of. I 100% wouldn't be anywhere like I am today without your input. And just hearing your story, and obviously I know your story, you know mine, I really see a lot of myself in your story, and I can see why you did with me what you did because of what you've been through, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I think any other church, any other pastor who had handled me differently, I wouldn't be anywhere near where I am today. But different story for a different time, maybe.
Yeah.
So let's talk about your current role, the Director of Ministry for the Elim Churches. What is that?
Yeah, well, I mean, many years ago, up until really about the year 2000, for many years, we had a role called the Field Superintendent who would work alongside what was then known as the Secretary General. And his role was really that the men, as it was then predominantly men, the ministers out on the field. And when our current General Superintendent came into office, Chris Cartwright, he was keen to see a role established that would fulfil some of that same kind of brief, but in our current Elim climate. So my responsibilities really are about the life of the minister and ministers across our movement, and it embraces a number of aspects. So the whole process by which people apply to become an Elim minister, the selection process that they go through, that we can, with them, test that call and whether they are fit for really service in Elim. The 3-year MIT training program that's about developing people towards ordination. I also play a part in support of the regional leaders in relation to other ministerial matters, whether they be administrative, discipline, anything really that relates to that, the processes that serve the lives of our ministers, the well-being of our ministers. That's a massive thing that's so challenging. And I'm privileged to work alongside Chris Cartwright, our General Superintendent, in support of him at Malvern. Obviously, I again, part of the national leadership team. But really, it is that whole journey of leadership and ministry in Elim.
So obviously LCF is an Elim church. I think for me, in many years, growing up in a church that was affiliated with Elim or an Elim church, I didn't really know what Elim was. I knew my context. I knew CLC, I knew the people, the faces, the elders and the pastors there. And it was only really when I grew up and I started looking at ministry myself and exploring that, I realised we're part of this huge network of 550 odd church in the UK, multiple thousands worldwide, and really not only the safety of that, I mean that in a way, in accountability, because we see a lot of abuse in the church today. Yes. The accountability and the safety of that, but also the family of that, and I think it's something I'm really, really privileged to be a part of. So I wonder if you can just spend a moment just talking about Elim, what it means to be an Elim church. LCF is an Elim church. It's not just out on its own in the wild.
I think you've touched on a number of the headlines I would think that are really important. I think that it's as much as it's important for an individual to belong in a local church, I believe strongly it's important for a local church to belong in a broader family. a network. The word family has been part of Elim culture for many, many years. And I think that that's what those of us who connect deeply, certainly in ministry, feel very much. And more, that's, I think, something that's coming back. I think over the last 15, 16 years, that's come back on the agenda, what it means to be part of that. But accountability is a good word. There's some massive dangers today in our current climate, where churches are scrutinised and critiqued socially far more than we ever have been, that accountability is important. Mavericks might make progress in ministry, but they can also be very dangerous. And when a maverick leader gets it wrong, there's usually hurting sheep behind them. And I think that it's very healthy for leaders, as well as churches, to belong to something where they can be mutually accountable and say, you know what, I'm not going to get it right all the time. I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to need somebody to lovingly come alongside, put their arm around me and say, hang on, fella. I think one of the things we do well in Elim is humility. Now, that seems a little bit wrong to say one of the things we do well is humility. And by that I mean, we've been around a long time, Michael, 105 years, as you know. And we're standing on the shoulders of many, many giants. We think back to the halcyon days, it seems, of the 1930s. I just please God, let not that be our story forever. Let our halcyon days be ahead of us, not behind us. I think that they are. And I think that we've been living in some of those. But I think that our longevity is very significant. I have grown up, so I've seen a lot of movements rise and sadly not always survive. Think of the charismatic renewal of the 60s, 70s and early 80s, and movements came into being that actually stirred our journey as an Elim movement quite a bit and got us thinking about ourselves. And we didn't have a license on the Holy Spirit, but not all of them are around today. And I think what Elim offers to a church is some stability and longevity. Yet at the same time, I don't think we're stuck in our ways. I don't think we're stuck in traditional ways. I think we have the capacity to adapt and to be flexible. Every year at our annual, quotes, business conference, we change how we do things. That's the way that works. We're always trying to do that. I think there is a hunger and a thirst in Elim amongst our leaders, amongst our national leaders, to say, actually, we want to be effective as a Christian movement of churches and ministries in this nation, which means we've got to be flexible and adaptable. However, every building needs a foundation and a frame. Whatever colour your windows are or however you decorate your building, you need a solidity. And I think we can offer that to churches, but we don't cramp the style of a local church in their own particular area to express a sense of their vision and their passion. And I think to be part of Elim today is not to be a cookie-sized church, or a cookie-fit church, and we're all the same. That would have been the story 30, 40, 50 years ago in particular. Elim's quite eclectic now because we're multi-generational, we're multi-national, and I think that Luton would be encouraged to be a church that reaches what Luton is as a community and its district and area, which is different to a church in Northern Ireland or West Wales or the top of Scotland or Cornwall or even central London. So I think there's great flexibility for a church to be who they are, but know the security and stability of values and leadership and resources and accountability and support when you need it.
That's fun. I think that's a beautiful way of summing it up. There's a term I heard recently. I think it was low control, high accountability, which I think could be really true of Elim. So the expression of the local church. So we even think of Luton. We've got Dunstable sort of 10 minutes away. We've got Letchworth 20 minutes away. We all believe the same thing. We all confess the same thing, but the expression of that is really uniquely depicted to the community that it's in. And as you said, Luton's such a diverse town, and that's expressed in our congregation, but not only our congregation locally. We see that expression all through Elim, don't we? Not only our pastors, but our congregations. We've got a massive diversity of nations, socio-economic backgrounds, gender, age, which is just an exciting family to be a part of.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. So I guess we'll wrap this up. Stuart, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us. if we are gathering in October, you are due to be down with us.
I'm praying that will, because I can't wait for that, man, and I can't wait to come and be down with you. But my promise is, if we're not, then we'll get that on the calendar as soon as we can when we are. But let's all hope and pray that we've got the freedom to do that.
Yeah, well, just thank you for being you personally, but also our movement. Our movement owe a huge debt to you in your role. You look after us ministers so well. Is it 700 odd ministers you
probably
sort of
850 credentialed ministers at the moment? Yeah,
that's amazing. Yeah, so thank you so much for being here. Thank you for taking the time today, and we'll speak to you again soon.
Bless you, mate.
Thanks, Steve.